Okay, fantastic. Okay, so, thank you very much. Thank you for coming to Creative Futures on a Thursday afternoon. It's great to see a good turnout, as always. Just want to say a few little words about residencies and the importance of them in regards to being an artist and creative. They're important because they give time, and as we all know, time is a privilege as being an artist. Time to develop ideas. It gives you a deep immersion in a research inquiry, but it's also about expanding the community of practice that you're involved in and meeting people. Now, we're very lucky to have Julie Upmeyer today with us, who's an artist and initiator, which I think is a very interesting word to use. I hope you explain a little bit more about that, talk a little bit more about that later. Who creates sculptures and objects, performances, installations. She's recently moved from Istanbul to Wales. There's an interesting story there we're going to hear about, where you continue to initiate projects. Her artwork and projects and exhibitions have taken her all over the world, so this is an international artist and creative, and instinctively draws upon those experiences of residencies for her own projects here. She's co-founded art residencies in Istanbul and also is now renovating a house, a very large house in Anglesey, and that's soon to become a cultural centre for cultural creative projects, together with being a studio and a home for her family. Okay, so I'd like you to kind of welcome Julie to Creative Futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. You add initiator. I'll just explain that in the beginning to get it out of everyone's mind. I struggled with a lot of different words. Artist, visual artist is pretty straightforward. Beyond that, you're stuck with arts consultant, arts project manager, arts, there's another more really technical, awful word. But that's not what I feel like I do. I initiate things. I like bringing people together. I like activating spaces. I like multidisciplinary groups who have very different experiences and who come together around a particular topic in a particular space and share what they know. I could be an initiator of entrepreneurial projects. It could be an initiator of a residency. It could be an initiator of a collaboration. I can be part of a collaboration. I can contextualize a collaboration. And it's a fun word that people don't really know what it means, so they come up with it as they go along. And it's a starting point. It's a conversation starting point instead of like businesswoman or something more definitive. So, answers your question. The wondrous wide world of artist residencies. Oh, okay. I don't know why the pictures are funny, but I'll just pretend they're really artistic looking. I'm just going to bring you through the very windy, turny road of my path through residencies, which is kind of like a mini CV, but it brings you to where I am now and how I came to be involved with artist residencies in so many different aspects. When I was in art school in Michigan, in the States, we had a little artist library, and it had this book called Artist Communities. It was a book published by the Alliance of Artist Communities, which is a network of artist residencies, mostly in the United States with some international members. And it pretty much just had a one-page profile of all of the artist residencies in the States. I most probably kind of stole the book. It was just in my studio for about 4 years of my education. I think some students actually came to me to borrow it. But that was kind of my window into the world and my way of seeing how being an artist and making artwork could go somewhere, that could open up doors to me that involved more than just like sitting in a studio and making stuff. After I graduated from art school, I took my little Dodge Neon and drove all around the United States and through Canada. The internet had just kind of started being a way to communicate with people and to find out information. So it hit me in a really good time. I was like, oh my goodness, I can send an email to this arts organization in California and they'll write back to me. And then, so I set out this whole trail for myself. Somehow my parents let me drive for 3 months by myself in a car. It was fine. It was fun. So I ended up in California. All the different organizations I was visiting, I offered to help for 2 or 3 days just to get a feel for what the art world or what arts was like outside of a university. So I ended up at the 18th Street Art Center and met Clayton Campbell, who happened to be the director of Residencies at the time. So Residencies is an international association and network of artist residency organizations. So, 19-year-old Julie, mine was like, oh my gosh, there's an international network of artist residencies. Fantastic. And it also turns out that the Alliance of Artist Communities had a conference in San Francisco the following weekend. So Clayton said, oh, you should go volunteer at the conference. So I said, okay, great. Drove up there and got to attend the conference of the Alliance of Artist Communities, which just blew my mind completely. It was amazing to meet the directors of all of these organizations. So that summer was the Residencies conference, the international organization in Australia. So I decided that I had to go to it. This is just like my future, and I had to go to Australia to go to this conference. I wasn't the director of an organization, but somehow they said I could go. So I went and then blew my mind, and met the directors of all of the organizations around the world. One of them offered me a job after I graduated, and it was a space in India called the Global Arts Village. So he invited me to come help set up the program. I won't go into details. It wasn't ready to be a residency yet. I arrived and I didn't have anywhere to stay even, so I slept in the corner of a room for a while. It was interesting, but I had to go after a few months. But the next conference, I was still in touch with Residencies, and the director of the next conference, which was Rudolf Brünger from the Uferfabrik in Berlin, invited me to work for him to organize the next conference. So I flew to Berlin. Yep, okay, good, I'm here. Thanks. So I was involved in organizing that conference, and I ended up being in charge of the documentation of it. I'm telling you all these details because I want to emphasize that a pathway through being a creative, cultural, artistic person is in no way linear. It takes beautiful, wonderful paths, and I'm just sharing with you mine to get an idea of the variety of things that have contributed to the projects that I'm doing now and my life as an artist. So I had to go through all the recordings of the sessions and type it out, and Residencies had just gotten a new website, and I had to load the dictations of the presentations onto the website. I didn't know about website editing at all, but I figured it out, and I realized I really liked it. I was kind of embarrassed that I was like, oh, I really like website editing, because I'm, just got my degree in ceramics and sculpture. But I liked it, and they didn't have a website editor at the time. They had this brand new website. A coder guy made it, but they didn't have someone to make news items and develop new content and write newsletters. So I talked Residencies into hiring me for 10 hours a week, $10 an hour, to be the Residencies website editor, which I did as I was continuing to travel and work for different artists and different residencies in and around Europe. So I held that position for 8 years, actually, and the whole organization was entering a much different digital world than it had before. So I was able to develop like an interesting newsletter and kind of form with the board and with the members what it means to be a global network. I ended up being part of the team that developed a new website, and I designed the search tool for Residencies, and that was nice. And it's a website, so you can do it from anywhere, so it was very flexible. I didn't have to be sitting in the office in Amsterdam. I flew there sometimes, but it was a very free, you have to do it, you can't disappear, but it was a very great opportunity. During that time, I organized a lot of the conferences. I ended up being invited to, as an artist for the first time, to a residency in Istanbul. I didn't know where, I could barely point Istanbul out on the map at that point, but there we go. It was a 1-month-long residency. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. I decided to stay. I had been moving every 3 to 6 months at that point, following different jobs and opportunities. And I ended up staying for 11 years in Istanbul. Didn't mean to, but things happen. So I had met she was a circus performer and a performance artist, and we ended up starting an art space together. We renovated a building in the hardware district of Istanbul, turning it from kind of cigarette-infused worker hardware people space into a double-level performance space and studio. We had 2 studios. We had an international residency program and hosted about 40 artists over the course of 4 years. And we did a lot of our own personal art projects and explorations and during that time. Nobody understood what we were doing in Istanbul, but the international people kind of did when they came and understood what fascinated us so much about the hardware district of Istanbul, because it's amazing. So that brought me, again, I was still working with Residencies. Within Residencies, a couple different little mini networks branched out, one of which was the micro residency network, again, which I'll explain a tiny bit more later. So I was in Japan, kind of helping them develop that network. There was a different conference for that. And then, Wales. I met my husband while living in Istanbul. He's from Colwyn Bay. So we were both ready to leave Istanbul. I had one daughter when we were there. And Istanbul's a great place if you're an independent artist doing what you want to do, but we didn't want to raise children there. And neither one of us wanted to live in the States. I hadn't lived there since art school, really. And so with very little conversation, we decided to move to North Wales. And we started looking for houses. And we pretty much quickly decided it would be interesting to live on an island. So we just started looking in Anglesey and found several. And then when we discovered Plas Bodfa, it was a perfect combination of commerce, business, life, living, arts, like the house. Well, I could talk for another hour about the history of the house, but people had always used the house for different combinations of residential and commercial activities. And it had the openness to that, and we knew that the house could handle that. And I have aspirations for my own workspace, as well as artist residencies and exchange projects and workshops and everything else, and the house could take that. So since we decided on that, then our whole life, artistic plan, business plan has then developed itself within the context of this house. So if you see what we're doing now, it's not like we came in and knew exactly that that's what we wanted to do, but that all those ideas have grown within the context of the location of that house and the physical aspects of that house. I won't go into that too much more because we'll focus on residencies. But we're having another exhibition in April. So we have 69 creative projects happening throughout the entirety of the house pre-construction. So we had our first exhibition last year, Sui Generis, which I think probably some of you were attending. So we're doing it again. It's during Anglesey Art Week's open studios and galleries, 2.5 weeks over the Easter period. So hope to see you. Come, it'll be fun. And a ton of performances this year. So that's a general path through residencies and art and life to get us to here. Okay, so I've written several articles and I really love residencies and I think a lot about them. I like talking to people about them and I love going to residency conferences. So throughout the course of all of this website editing and working for residencies and being an artist in residence, I've come to my own kind of thinking about how to group them, what they are, how they've evolved since the first kind of artist colonies, since the 1900s. So this is my grouping of different artist residencies, and I'll just bring you through it so you can have some different ways to think about what a residency is, how it's structured, why they exist, why you might want to do one, and some expectations about its structure and how you would fit into it. Has anyone applied to residencies before? Yes, yes, yeah. Has anyone gone to a residency before? Cool, good. Nice, it's fun, isn't it? So I'll bring you through this. One grouping is a governmental residency. So depending on the country, the actual government may be really involved in artist residencies as a form of cultural exchange, as a form of soft diplomacy, as a way to soften trade or soften relationships with trading partners, to kind of send artists on the way to prepare ways for political conversations. It's quite popular throughout the world. Not so much, well, here there's a lot of different things going on, but a lot of countries, especially in Asia, like most of the big residencies are very government sponsored. So it's helpful to be able to spot that, to understand how the organization is structured, who's funding it, and what they might expect of you as a guest. They may be a part of exchange programs, so they want to send their artists to places, and then they want artists to come to them. And government residencies generally have very specific and very hidden kind of rules behind this. Like, they're really interested in South America, so they will focus all of their funding and efforts to South America. And if you can figure that out, you can just decide, okay, it's not worth my time to apply to this because I'm not South American. And this may seem like a very substantive, stable way of organizing residencies, but they can change like that. The change of leadership can completely shift the political agendas, and it can be completely opposite in a few years. But when they do it, they generally, especially in Asia, they put a lot of money into it, huge, shiny, beautiful buildings. And if you can kind of get yourself in there, they can be amazing. Second, and these categories can also overlap. So there could be a residence, and there's many residencies I could give as an example that could easily fit into more than one of these categories. So these are not definitive either. Attached to a museum or a gallery. So big museums, small museums, very private galleries are often interested in having more involvement in the creation of the work that they present. So they might have every once in a while residency or a residency attached to their institution in order to bring another aspect to their organization rather than just like presenting and selling work. It also gives them a whole like range of content to help sell the work. So to be able to tell the artist's story in a more in-depth way can really be beneficial to them to sell the end product. Obviously, they would be most focused on development and production. The goal is usually to actually make a work, not always. Helps increase the visibility of institutions, and they can also use that in an international sense to make connections with other galleries, make connections with governmental organizations. So they have another range of things that they want out of this program. Academic university structure. They often take on the schedule and hierarchies of academia. A university may have a residence program or a poet in residence, a writer in residence. A lot of times they will have some academic requirements for application. Oftentimes they're longer, like 1 semester or 1 year, where you're really embedded in the daily goings-on of the university. There might be requirements to give lectures, attend lectures. But it can be an interesting way to make additions and connections within your practice that wouldn't be available outside of a university structure. So you could have access to an entire science lab, or to a quantum physics professor. That could be a really interesting cross-fertilization of your own ideas as an artist. Retreat colony. So if you ask someone, okay, what is an artist residency? This is the most kind of stereotypical. You go into the woods, you have a hut, people will bring you lunch, and you will make beautiful, brilliant work in deep isolation. This can be fantastic, but it's not the only way to think about being an artist in resident. Generally, this was the first model. The first one of this model was in the States, 1900, the Yaddo colony, 1917, the McDowell colony. So these are founded by patrons who have some connection to the arts and want to endow their family fortunes upon enabling other artists, musicians, painters to flourish in this isolated environment. And they do. If you're able to be a part of this is like artist heaven, no doubt. Many of them are also very renowned. They're very famous, extremely competitive to get in, but if you are accepted, you're kind of following in this lineage of acceptance, and it helps in your famousness as an artist. These very 1900s ones have lists of alumni that you will have heard of many of the names, so it's a path to fame for many artists. But it's a very old world artistic structure, mostly. There's sponsors, they're giving you something, and you're creating things. And it's also a nice social time for artists as well. There's usually a nice mix of isolation and big dinners in the evening and celebration, and so there you go. Workshop learning themed. So these come from more, to seek these out, you would have to have more of an idea specifically about what you want. Sometimes the European Ceramic Work Center, they have all of the most amazing ceramic equipment of every kind in the whole world and technicians that know everything. And they want to help artists produce amazing, cutting-edge, innovative, new ceramic work. So these are very studio production-based gathering of skills. You go there because you have an idea of something that you want to learn or produce, and you go there to do it. And there's lots of other people also trying to work through the materials and do it as well. It could also be there's a lot now that are kind of not tourist trips, but they're very programmed. There's one that goes in the Arctic Circle. So this is a crossover between scientists and artists, and you're literally on a scientific research ship for, I think it's almost a month. So it's a that's a specific environment in which to be immersed. So it's very specific and very kind of structured and organized and very intense in that particular environment. It could be much less. It could be a week, a week and a half in which you're working up to producing a small work for a thing. So it can be small, and residencies don't have to be all the time. They're not necessarily perpetual things that accept residents one after another, which leads us into the intermittent nomadic residency. Residencies can happen once a year for a month, and that's what they are. They can be completely one-off experiences organized by people that happen one time, and that's it. There's not a consistent infrastructure that is always receiving a flow of ideas. It can be tied to a festival, an exhibition, an event. A lot of these residencies can also happen and you don't really know about it. A lot of big festivals do accept projects that require a month to get them ready. And big exhibitions also too, because those are kind of silent residencies, that it is a residency, but it's not something that is necessarily out there on the internet you can find and apply to. They're hooked onto other parts. Artist-run micro-residency. There's a ton of these recently popping up in every context, in every country in the world. Not to be biased, but I think these are really fascinating. They're very intimate. Oftentimes it could be just the host and you and maybe a couple other artists. You experience the realities of their life, of their studio, of their village, of their city, of their life. Communication is really important on this part. I'll go into that a little bit later. It's self-initiated. This is not an institution. There's no one asking them to do this. These artists and people are hosting other artists as part of their practice. They're very free to follow their own missions. They can accept whoever they want to accept. They rely heavily on the initiator's time and resources, and that's a delicate balance for those people who are running those projects to give to themselves enough of their own time and hosting the residents, and that can be tricky to figure out. They're rarely properly funded. And residents often pay a fee. I mean, that's the business structure behind it. They're not part of this governmental funding policy. They're not patrons themselves. They're artists. So it's a matter of forming a dialogue with them, finding your own funding, or deciding that this is important, you want to do it, and you figure out how to do it financially. This is kind of a European, whoa, that was very sensitive. This is kind of a mostly European phenomenon. There's a lot of arts councils and European governments that really want to send people their artists, like desperately. But in many places in Asia, I know this model very well from Istanbul, because there's no big residency institution there. There's no place that can handle, like, oh, we're hosting 11 artists and we always have residents. There was a lot of artist-run spaces and a couple here and there, but none that could handle an official, like, paperwork this thick exchange program with the Austrian national government blah 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 program. So these governmental bodies would actually rent apartments in Istanbul, maybe have a local connection person kind of organizing them, and would just like send artists. They would pay artists and send them to like live and work in this apartment. This happens a lot. You don't really know about it because they're not advertised very well. But I find this really difficult and problematic. Especially because when we were running the residency, we ended up like taking care of most of them, so it's not really fair either. Anyway, another topic. So, sources of information. These 5, well, most residencies do have their own web pages, so you can go and search one by one. It's easier to at least start looking for information through one of these pages, each of which are organized a bit differently and are coming from different sources. So Residencies I touched on before. It's an actual network of artist residency organizations. So the purpose of the organization is to bring together directors, share good practices, have conferences. But the website also functions as a search engine in order to bring the member residencies into contact with potential applicants. They have another new website after the one that I was part of, and their search tool is, I mean, it's incredible. It's really amazing. You can click boxes like what country, duration, equipment. It's impressive. And then each residency has a profile on the Residencies webpage, which is also really useful because it forces all of those organizations to fill out the right boxes, like how long is your residency, what's your mission, what's expected of you as an artist, what we provide, images. Like it forces everyone to do it in the same format, so it's really easy for you as a user to find that information. It also lists their own website, and I'll go into websites for organizations next. So that's really useful just because of the search tool. It can help you narrow down things in your own research. But this is a membership organization, so it will only list residencies which are a member of Residencies. So Residencies has some structure for making sure that the residencies on the website are real, they're functioning, they have some basic structures in place for hosting. So it's good to see an organization is there. There's plenty that are not members. It does cost money for the organizations. Transartists is a long-standing Dutch organization that started to provide, as much information to Dutch artists as possible, but ended up being kind of an international platform for performing arts organizations, residencies. Their website is massive, and they have like a great team of people keeping it up all the time and trying to make sure all of that information is up to date and good. But this is not a membership organization. Anyone that exists at all can be on there, so that's not vetted in any way, but it has huge amounts of information and very well organized. I mean, the Dutch are good in that way. Rivet, I hadn't caught up with them in a while. I don't know their new page very well. Residency Unlimited is a semi-nomadic, I can't really explain what they do. They make custom residencies for people in very embedded ways in New York, and they've been doing it for a long time. I don't completely understand how it works. But they had started a section on their web page called Opportunities, which was amazing. So I haven't gotten a chance to explore this Rivet site because I just found it when I was putting together this presentation that they had kind of made a site on its own just for opportunities. But check it out. It looks pretty. That's all I can say. Wooloo it started I think about 15 years ago by two Swedish or Danish, two Nordic people who wanted an alternative platform to post artist opportunities. These pop up and kind of go away all the time, but this one's a great one. And they've started some really innovative programming and projects. One's called the Human Hotel, which is kind of like a Airbnb, but just for artists. They want to host, it's vetted, you have to kind of apply and be accepted, but it's a fascinating, really cool project. And I have several friends who've had Human Hotel experiences in other cities and had incredible experiences. So that's kind of like a mini artist residency, but more often it's a place to stay if you're attending an event or traveling or doing some personal travel and want to stay with an artist, which is interesting, but it also takes work to be a host as well. So that has to be part of your thinking. So regional platforms, these come and go. Like for a while, Japan had an incredible website for all of the tiny, medium, and huge residencies in Japan. France had one for a really long time. These websites last for like 5 to 10 years, I've noticed. So I didn't list them individually because the 3 that I knew the best had stopped now. So TransArtist has a list of it and trust them to keep it up. So check out that. I think Spain has one now. So different little regions can also be sources of information that wouldn't necessarily light up as heavy on bigger platforms. And really, really ridiculously specific search fields can be useful as well, like residency with 18-volt kiln by the seaside. Like, just see what happens. I mean, some interesting things can come up. Right. Now, those websites are really great, but before you go to the effort of thinking about yourself in a residency, definitely before you apply, you have to kind of do some investigative research just to see if it's a good fit. Every residency is not good for every person. So go to their webpage, please. Like, go to the residency's own webpage and see what it looks like. So I'm just going to do a short overview about how to read a web page. Find the About page. It may not be obvious, but look through the page and see how they introduce themselves. So like, find it in the menu, it might be at the bottom. Listen to the language they use when they're describing themselves. Like, is it very formal? Is it like more casual? Is it trying to be really chirpy? Just get the feeling of the text. When you're doing that internationally, it can be difficult because a lot of people are doing things in their second, third, fourth, fifth language, so you have to pick up cues in other ways. But have a look and just see how the website is laid out as well. So graphics, it's not really showing up that well. Anyway, like, just look at the difference between these two. And I'm not in any way saying one is better or one is not better. This one is a residency project. It's got like really fancy colors. There were things moving all over the place. Member of Residencies. Okay, good. Add this welcome button. So someone put a lot of effort and money into this website and really took care of it. What does that say about their residency? Something, nothing, but it's worth noting. This one, like, I can get really critical and mean really quickly, and I won't. But like, okay, nice logo. They have this, that. So this is an older website. This was made like 8 to 10 years ago. They still use it. The actual content on this website was fantastic. So, but just note these things. And sometimes you want to have a residency that's not super flashy. You want something that you can tell someone that's not good with the latest technology stuff is putting all of their heart and soul into creating a very thoughtful, like, welcome page. And that's fantastic. Application information, just look over this right away. Is it an online one? Do you have to email something in? Do you mail it? I mean, I've applied not that long ago to one you actually had to mail it. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. I don't know what that says about you, but that's something. So this one is you can't read it at all. Okay. Work samples, they're very specific about what you need and about how they want it, which I think is really good. The more specific they are about what they're asking you for, the more information they have about you, and the more information that you actually have about them and the things that are important to them. online applications. Sometimes you can't click all the way through, which is difficult, but if you can, try to look all the way to the end before you even start. Images of the space. Like, just find as many images of the space as you can about the workspace, about the environs, about the bedroom, and just be as judgmental as possible. And also about the quality of the images. Like, let all of these, like, nice, mean, complimentary, all of these thoughts, just let them become part of your impression of it, because that's your first impression, second impression, they're all really important to see if it's a good fit. Like, if you think that this, like, too dark picture is charming, fantastic. Like, that is good. You can be like, yeah, I take pictures like that too, fantastic. Or if you're thinking, oh God, they can't even take a proper photo. Like, those thoughts that you're having are really important. Yeah. So finances. A lot of residencies have themselves partially funded. It is expensive to run a residency. I ran a residency, we didn't have any funding. You'll be surprised about how much it cost us to host someone, and we didn't even ever think about paying ourselves for any of our time. So don't be surprised. I mean, it's the building, it's a lot. So just make sure you understand what funding they have, what they're offering. There are some really commercial ones, and you'll be able to tell. Like, it's only 1/2 step away from like a tourist resort or a holiday home, and they kind of had an idea, oh yeah, we'll get artists too. Check their artistic activities, see where they're coming from. They should list very clearly, if there is a fee, what is it, what it goes toward. A lot of them, especially the artist-run micro-residencies, can have it partially there. Like, they have enough funding to give you the space for free, but they can't pay for your materials, they don't pay a stipend, and you have to figure out your travel. So just make sure you understand what you're getting, what you're giving, what it's for, and how you feel about it. Okay, then you kind of go to the next level. Reveal their bias, reveal your bias, and be utterly pragmatic. Like, if you can find out who funds it, figure it out. If it's a huge governmental organization and you see from their past artist list that they're, again, really into getting Asian artists and you're not of Asian descent, you don't have a good chance. Don't waste your time. If they're an artist-run space and they're TV production people and really into the crossovers between art and sound and digital production, if that's not of interest to you, even if they're in like the best location you've ever seen, it's probably not a good fit. Is it a public organization? Is it private? What's expected of you as an artist? Do they want you to make stuff and have a show? Is that important to them? Is that important to you? It's hard to get a feeling of its competitiveness, but you can sense it a lot of times through their past artist list, how many artists they accept, how institutional it is. The chances are never good. Like, you apply to a ton of stuff. It's like applying for an exhibition. Like, you never know. List of past artists. Are they a member of a network? And a lot of interesting things can be found if you just Google the organization and don't go to their website. Like, do they pop up on Trans Artists? Are they on Residencies? Go to page 3, 4, 5 of the search. Has any other artist ever written anything about the organization? If you Google the organization like that I worked for in India, there's a whole webpage, a 10-year like list of horrible things that happened there from artists from all over the world. And that doesn't appear till, of course, page 4 of the search. So go a little bit deeper. Hopefully you don't find anything that bad, but it's worth knowing. And it could be that an artist had written a really interesting blog about the organization that the organization didn't put on their site and wouldn't pop up normally, but be really useful to you to know. And you. I mean, you don't just go to a residency because you feel like you should. It has to be a more significant need, and you'll get a better experience if you yourself are more specific. Do you really just want time and space away from your studio, away from your family, away from your country, away from your house, and you want to come up with a new idea and you want to be by yourself, and like know that first before you start looking for them? Do you want to finish a project? There are a lot of organizations that are really interested in giving people space to finish things, because sometimes it's so difficult. You've done the research, you've gotten that first part in, but it just takes a period of focus to finish it off. And that's an exciting part for an organization. So a lot of organizations are really into helping you finish something. Do you want to meet people? Residencies can be hugely social places, in which case you don't want a residency when there's only one other artist or two other artists. Find a bigger one where there seems to be a good mix of people. Improve your career, notoriety. That only comes with a small portion of residencies. There's residencies around that are prestigious, and if you get in, it's a big deal. Is that prestige important? In which case, do your best application ever. If not, it will take you a lot of work to put together those applications, and your chances are so slim. If that's not what you're expecting out of a residency, then your time would be better spent in something more specific. Do you want a reason to be somewhere? I went to a residency for that reason. I was interested in a place, and I don't like being a tourist. I don't. I want to have a reason to be somewhere. I want to be embedded in an organization, in a group. I want a purpose. Residencies can be fantastic for that if you don't know quite what you want, but you want to go somewhere and you want a reason to be there. Research, obviously. There's a lot of residencies that ask for specific projects, like what you want to go there. And then they can be amazing portals to meet people, to discover the information that you want to meet. And they're set up for that. And that's something that they do really well. So instead of going to a place on your own and try to do research yourself, to be embedded within an organization can open up pathways into institutions, into universities, into spaces. If you've had that blessing, oh, I'm a resident at, it's much easier to approach someone in a new place to say, oh, I'm here because of this. And they say, oh, okay, here you go. Special equipment or skill, we talked about that. And can you create a residency in your own studio? There's been several fascinating projects lately about providing a context around your own space. The most fascinating one, among others, is Residency in Motherhood. This is a fascinating project. You apply, you get it, and La Quinta Clayton has provided a structure in which that enables you to think about your life as you would in a residency, but you don't have to be away from your life. So it's a personal kind of transformational project in a way, but her project in particular allows you to justify it, to say, look, I have a residency in motherhood, or I have a residency in my studio, and you yourself can develop the structure around that. It's a matter of putting your mind in that framework, saying, okay, I have a residency this month. I'm going to spend from 9 o'clock till 9:30 walking a different path around my house every day and record that. That's my residency. And setting that up for yourself can be, it's not the same as going to the Arctic Circle, but it can have a lot of the benefits of a residency without the time, transportation, financial goings-on of an institution. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? The next part, I'm just going to tell you the residencies that I've been in, a little bit how they are to give you an idea about some of the realities of an actual residency, like little mini case studies. This was the one in Istanbul. It was me, one other artist. The guy who was running it had run an art space there for some time, and we were his first, and as it turned out, last residence ever. It was a month long. It was very content heavy. So he introduced us to all of the art people in Istanbul. We had to write stuff every night. We had questionnaires to fill out. I had a studio that he had arranged for us and had like studio time in there. As it turned out, for someone who had this and then ended up living there for 10 years, this was like crash course in Istanbul art scene 101 and was amazingly helpful. That amount of content, if I was never going back to Istanbul again, may or may not have been useful. I don't know. But this was very, like, we went out to dinner every night. He took us to all of his favorite places. We met all of his friends. It was very, very intimate and very structured. So it wasn't like a month of time to wander around by yourself. This was a residency. It was a 2.5-week residency, very short, and in a small village in Latvia. So this was an artist. It was 3 different families of artists and makers that all lived here together. They did a once-a-year residency in the 2.5 weeks leading up to their village fair, carnival thing. So they invited 8 artists to make a work for the carnival fair festival. So we had 2.5 weeks to make a work to display at it. And this was, I think, of all the residencies I've been to, this was really my favorite. It was short, it was sweet. I like working with people. Like, I don't like hanging out so much. So the people that I met here, working alongside 8 people, all focused on the same thing, all working by ourselves, but heading in the same direction with the same goals, was incredible. It was very well organized. We had food, like lunch, dinner, so we didn't have to worry about that. This is an artist-run residency, but they only do it once a year. So all of the artists that were living there were able to kind of anticipate and get excited about what was happening and then focus completely on the project when we were there. So they weren't feeling pulled away from their own practice. And then they helped a bit with the installation. And so I pretty much knew what I was going to do before I went. And then my time was spent exploring the village and doing the work. But it didn't come, like the ideas didn't come from the village. I pretty much knew what I wanted to do before. I'm not a printmaker, but in working with Residencies, they were members, electro-etching residency. I just thought it sounded really cool. And I always had a fantasy that I wanted to go learn about electro-etching. I didn't really care that it was in the Canary Islands. I just thought that it would be really fun to learn like etching with electricity and not with acid. It was really expensive and I didn't have the money to pay for it. But I ended up talking, like we emailed for probably a year and we came to an agreement. He needed a new website and I wanted to learn electro-etching. So I did a double residency. Usually his are 2.5 weeks and I stayed for a month. So from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock, he taught me electro-etching. It's Spain, so siesta, whatever. I can never sleep in the afternoon. I don't know how that works. And then from like 5 until 10 at night, I would work on his website and rewriting his texts and whatever else. So we organized a work exchange. And this is an artist-run residency, and that can happen. So there's the front door into places, but then there's so many other ways to come about it as well. Like I could have never paid the money to do this, but I got that experience by finding another way in. And we both had a fantastic time. He got a new website, which, he wouldn't have had the money to pay for someone to sit there, 6 hours a day for a month to get everything perfect and re-edit all of his photos and do everything. And I would have never gotten to play around with low voltage electricity. So it was just as an example that there's other ways to organize things as well. This was really random. I was living in Istanbul. I had met this group of artists from Armenia. They said it was a residency, but it actually wasn't a residency. It was just going around Armenia and meeting a bunch of Armenian feminists. So also things like if you're open-minded and things can go in drastically different directions than you expect, but if you're open to new experiences and you go with the flow, it can be so lovely and unexpected. So a lot of times when you've applied, you have a certain idea in your head and you're there, and then everything is different. So that's also something that can easily happen. And if that's an anxiety-causing thought, then make sure you're at a place that you have a lot of information about beforehand. This in Yukobo, he was on the board of Residencies, so I got to know him. He was the one who started the micro residency network, and he was really interested in our activities doing the residency in Istanbul. I was running the residency at that point. Also, the Residencies conference was in Australia or Japan, so he had a micro residency conference. Residencies had a conference, and he invited me and 2 other micro residency running artists for a residency at their space. So this was like a combination of hosting a conference, working for a conference, being an artist, and doing a bunch of other things at the same time too. It was a great time. Okay, so this was my investigative thing. I had never been to the pictures are so weird anyways. I had never been to a big institutional, like huge residency before. I had always kind of floated around the artist-run spaces. And this was the Gyeonggi Creation Center in South Korea. 50 artists there, totally sponsored by the Korean government, in the middle of nowhere. Here you go. Like, I don't ignore the black things, but my name was on the door, and then that's what I had for 3 months, literally in the middle of nowhere. As it turns out, it's 3 hours from Seoul, an hour bus, and then 2 hours on the metro. But those 50 artists were Korean, and there were 2 other international artists. So I thought that it would be like this very active, lots of artists all around all the time. But the structure of it was that the Korean artists had residencies, not really residencies, they had studios there for 2 years. And the international artists in residence came for 3 months. So our residency was at the end of the year, October, November, December. So the Korean artists had already had 2 waves of internationals coming and going. So they were kind of tired of like engaging with people and then having them leave again. So it was actually, I got a ton done. But if I was someone who needed a lot of people around and engagement, I would have gone nuts, literally. But I wanted to go here because I wanted to understand what it felt like to be hosted by a big institution. Because all the residencies I had been before had been really intimate. Like you're living in someone's house. They take you around. They hang out with you in the evening. This was very well funded, but all the people who worked for them worked for a big institution and went home at 5 o'clock. It's their job. So that the day we arrived, they took us to the supermarket and they were like, okay, well, here's the bus to get to the supermarket again. See you tomorrow. So it was really a really different experience. But I mean, we had a huge exhibition at the end in a giant space with professional graphic design, and I mean, there are definitely benefits of being involved in a big institution. But if you're looking for that intimacy and connection, I don't feel like I have any connection to Korea whatsoever. I had an amazing artist residency. I got to read like 4 books about dimensions and mathematics, which I never would have gotten to do, but I don't feel like I had like an intimate Korean experience. So, yeah. This was the art space that I touched on before that we had started in Istanbul. So it was my studio, it was my partner's circus performing training area. I won't go into it too much, I don't think. But we hosted artists. The program that we had developed was from 1 to 3 months. But because there was quite a significant fee associated with it, artists couldn't normally stay for more than a month. So all of our residencies were generally a month. As an artist running the space, we wanted artists that we were interested in, that we thought that their work was interesting, and we found them fun to hang out with. That's really hard to get. So probably like 1 in 8 was beneficial to me as an artist, which isn't great odds. And interestingly enough, a lot of them really didn't know what they wanted, which was the most frustrating. There are some artists that we had that I didn't like personally get along with, but they knew what they wanted, and I had a great time helping them get what they wanted, and they knew what they wanted. The bulk of them just kind of were hanging out, which I found horribly frustrating. Like, why did you come here to hang out in my house? So I could speak again about this for another hour, but we got better at the end, inviting people for specific projects. So we decided just to focus on our neighborhood by the end, and the only artists that we were accepting were people who had an idea or project about the hardware area. So then, like, we started to have more fun, people were more and more engaged, and then it ended up like coming to fruition in these series of exhibitions that we did like throughout the neighborhood. And the finances I'll just tell you a bit about how the whole finances for this, which will help illuminate other artist-run residencies, so you can get some idea about like why it costs £1,000 or €1,000 for a month. We had enough capital that we could buy the building. So that was our funding. So it was our building, at least. We renovated the building. We had like the electricity bills, upkeep. We did the cleaning ourselves. Like, we had very little overhead costs in that aspect. But we were running it. We were the people like doing the website. We were the people doing all the communications. We were the people that would take them around, speak Turkish to all the people, and do everything with them, for them. Yeah. A lot of the artists were able to get funding like from their countries to do it, and we did several exchange sort of projects as well with varying levels of success. I'll stop there. If there's more questions about it, I can answer at the end. Oh yeah, that is the end. Okay. Thank you. It was a whirlwind of a bunch of different things.